Welcome to the Explainer. Today we are jumping right into a classic board exam question, the kind that really tests your ability to tell apart some key sexually transmitted infections that all cause genital ulcers. Okay, let's get into it. Here's our challenge, straight from a 2006 medical board exam. We've got 4 statements about chancroid, donovanosis, and lymphogranuloma venereum, or LGV for short. Our job is to put on our detective hats and figure out which one of these statements is actually correct.
All right, let's start by digging into the disease in option A, which is chancroid. So what exactly are its defining features?
So the culprit here is this little bacterium. Now I want you to lock this into your memory. It is a gram-negative bacterium. That little detail is a huge clue that's going to help us crack this exam question wide open.
The most crucial point here is the pain. Think of it this way. If this ulcer could talk, it would be screaming. A chancroid ulcer is notoriously painful, and that's a massive clinical clue. On top of that, about half of the people who get it also develop these really painful swollen lymph nodes in the groin, which are known as buboes. And here's a classic visual clue that loves to pop up on exams. When you look at a sample from the ulcer under a microscope, the bacteria can sometimes line up in these chains that look just like a school of fish. This microscopic view, what the question calls bacterioscopy, is exactly what option A is talking about.
Okay, so with chancroid fresh in our minds, let's switch gears and move on to LGV, which pops up in options C and D. Let's see how this helps us build our case.
LGV is caused by a specific, much more aggressive type of chlamydia. You see those serovars? You can just think of them as distinct variations of the bacteria. And unlike other chlamydial infections, these particular types just love to invade the lymphatic system.
And right here is where option C really starts to fall apart. Take a look at that primary stage, the initial lesion. It's not some big, extensive ulcer. It's actually a small, painless little sore that honestly often goes completely unnoticed. The really dramatic, painful, swollen lymph nodes, they don't show up until later. And importantly, look at that last point. LGV absolutely can cause elephantasia.
So when you put them side by side like this, the difference is just night and day. Chancroid is painful and it sticks around. The initial LGV lesion is painless and fleeting. So based on this, we can pretty confidently say option C, which talks about an extensive ulcer in most cases, is just not right.
All right, finally, let's take a look at donovamyosis, which is the star of options B and D.
Okay, so here we have another bacterial STI, but this one has its own very distinct personality. It's pretty rare in places like the US and Europe, but it's much more common in certain tropical regions.
The big takeaways here are painless in that beefy red appearance, but I want you to look very carefully at that last point. True lymph node swelling is not a typical feature of this disease. This is a classic board exam trick, so pay attention.
And that directly contradicts what option B is saying. So if it's not the lymph nodes, what in the world is causing the swelling in the groin?
Well, donovanosis causes something called pseudobuboes. These are basically subcutaneous granulomas that totally mimic swollen lymph nodes, but they aren't actually infected nodes. So, since option B claims that adenopathy is the most characteristic feature, we can confidently say it's incorrect.
Now let's circle back and address option D, which makes the bold claim that donovanosis does not cause elephantiasis.
Yeah, the sources are crystal clear on this. Just like LGV, if you leave donovanosis untreated, it's a known cause of genital elephantiasis. It happens because of chronic damage to the lymphatic system. So you guessed it, option D is also incorrect.
We've looked at all the clues, we've debunked the false leads, it's time to solve the puzzle.
And the correct statement from that 2006 exam is A. Let's do a quick victory lap and review exactly why it's the winner.
So why is A our winner? It hits the nail right on the head. It's a perfectly accurate description of a potential diagnostic finding in chancroid. Meanwhile, option B completely misses the mark on donovanosis by mistaking its most characteristic feature.
As for the other two, options C and D, they just misrepresent the clinical features of LGV and donovanosis. C gets the initial lesion of LGV all wrong, and D incorrectly states that donovanosis doesn't cause elephantiasis, which, as we now know, it absolutely can.
So that's the why, but how are you supposed to keep all of this straight when you're under pressure during an exam? Let's summarize the key things you need to know.
Honestly, this table is your ultimate cheat sheet. This is the single most important slide. Let's really break it down. First, just look at ulcer pain. See that? Chancroid is the only one that is consistently painful. That's a massive clue. Now, let's look at adenopathy, the lymph nodes. Both chancroid and LGV have true, painful buboes. But remember, the timing is different in LGV. They show up after that initial painless sore. And donovanosis? No true buboes at all. Just those look-alike pseudo-buboes. If you can master the distinctions in this table, you're going to have a huge advantage.
And that wraps up our breakdown. So, you've mastered these three. But are you ready for the final boss? Your next challenge is to think about how syphilis, the great imitator, with its own famous painless ulcer, fits into this whole puzzle. Thanks for joining The Explainer.